Today our history is of a young king who marched toward a destiny no mortal ruler should have survived. A king who had inherited chaos, sharpened it into discipline, and forged it into a blade aimed at the heart of the ancient world. And now he was walking straight into the greatest battle of his life, the legendary Battle of Gaugamela. The war historians still call the day the impossible happened. Alexander the Great rode at the head of his weary Macedonian army, men hardened by years of marching, sieges, hunger, and endless danger, yet still bound together by loyalty stronger than any shield wall. And as they crossed the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, they saw the horizon glowing with the countless fires of the Persian campfires that stretched so far it felt like the sky itself was burning. Darius III, the King of Kings, had gathered warriors from every corner of his empire. Skilled archers from the east, charioteers with scythed wheels gleaming like silver, death-armored cavalry that thundered like storms, and the famed immortals whose discipline matched the iron they carried. Every scout returned with the same terrifying truth: the Persians outnumbered the Macedonians 5-1, their lines spreading wider than the eye could see, their chariots designed to rip through infantry as easily as wind cuts through smoke. Alexander studied the battlefield, noticing how Darius had flattened the ground so the chariots could reach full speed. Realizing the Persians had shaped the environment itself into a weapon meant to crush his hopes before the first strike was thrown. The night before the battle, Alexander climbed a small hill, staring at the sea of Persian fires as his generals urged him to attack under cover of darkness. But he shook his head and declared that he would win in daylight because a stolen victory was not worthy of Macedonia. His men slept uneasily, knowing dawn would bring horrors none of them had ever faced. But they also trusted the young king who had never failed them. When the first rays of dawn broke across the sands, the world roared awake as Persian war drums thundered, elephants bellowed, archers pulled back their strings, and the ground vibrated beneath the chariots, while Alexander arranged his phalanx with calm precision, forming a defensive wall of sarissas that could swallow the earth itself. The Persians surged forward, a living avalanche of steel and fury, and the chariots tore across the plains with their scythe blades, spinning fast enough to cleave bone from flesh. But at the last possible second, the Macedonian infantry opened narrow lanes, letting the chariots pass harmlessly before collapsing on them from behind and killing them where they slowed. Darius watched from the center of his army, believing his overwhelming numbers would crush Alexander by sheer force. But what he did not understand was the brilliance of the Macedonian king's strategy. Alexander slowly shifted his cavalry to the right, dragging the Persian left flank with him, stretching their formation and forcing Darius to overextend his lines. Dust rose in thick clouds, and within them men screamed, shields shattered, horses fell, and spears flashed like lightning under a blood-red sun. The Macedonian phalanx pushed forward with terrifying unity, each soldier trusting the man beside him completely, their sarissas forming a moving wall of death that not even the elite Persian Immortals could break. Alexander saw what he had been waiting for: a gap forming in the Persian center, a weakness created by Darius's desperate attempts to counter the Macedonian maneuver. Without hesitation, Alexander shouted to his companion cavalry, lowered his spear, and charged straight into the opening. His horse Bucephalus surged forward like a creature born for war, and the companions followed, forming a wedge that tore through the Persians like a blade slicing cloth. The clash at the center was brutal beyond imagination. Alexander cut down the elite guards, one after another, blood splashing against his armor as he drove his way toward Darius himself. Panic rippled through the Persian lines as soldiers saw the Macedonians breaking into the heart of their formation. The sight of Alexander charging at full speed shook Darius to the core, and in a moment that changed history, the King of Kings turned his chariot around and fled the battlefield, abandoning his army to chaos. The Persian soldiers, seeing their king retreat, felt their courage collapse instantly, and the massive force that had once looked unstoppable now crumbled like dust in the wind. The Macedonians pushed forward relentlessly, driving the Persians into full retreat, and when the dust finally settled over the plains of Gaugamela, the truth became clear. Against impossible odds, Alexander had defeated the greatest empire of the ancient world. His soldiers lifted their weapons and shouted his name, knowing they had just witnessed a miracle of leadership, strategy, and courage. Alexander stood in the aftermath of victory, breathing heavily, covered in dust and blood, staring across a battlefield that had nearly swallowed him, yet instead became the place where he proved to the world that he was more than just a king. He was a conqueror, chosen by destiny, a warrior who would reshape history itself, and the war he should have lost became the war that defined him forever. After the dust of Gaugamela settled and the bodies of both Macedonian and Persian soldiers lay scattered across the endless Mesopotamian plains, Alexander the Great stood in the soft glow of the fading sun, knowing that the impossible victory he had achieved was only the beginning of a far greater storm that awaited him beyond the horizon. For Darius III had escaped, and as long as the King of Kings still breathed, the Persian Empire would not truly fall. So Alexander ordered his men to prepare for the hardest pursuit of their lives, a chase across deserts, mountains, and unknown lands. The Macedonian army marched into Babylon, welcomed with trembling respect, and yet Alexander barely paused, for the ghost of Darius haunted him like a shadow that refused to be forgotten. Riches flowed to him, cities surrendered without resistance, and entire satrapies pledged fealty to the conqueror who had defeated the mighty Persians at Gaugamela. But Alexander's heart was restless, driven by the burning desire to end a Persian dynasty once and for all. The march toward Susa was brutal, the heat unbearable, the nights cold enough to break a lesser army, and yet his men followed, bound to him by loyalty carved in blood. When they reached Susa, Alexander took possession of treasures beyond imagination, wealth collected over centuries by kings before Darius, yet he touched none of it, instead demanding only intelligence on the movements of the fleeing Persian ruler. Darius had gathered the remnants of his empire and retreated toward the eastern highlands, hoping the mountains and loyal satraps would slow the Macedonian advance. But Alexander moved with a speed no commander had ever dared to attempt, pushing his army through scorching plains and rocky passes until they reached the towering Zagros Mountains, home to tribes who owed allegiance to the Achaeans. There, one of the most brutal battles of Alexander's campaign awaited him: the ambush at the Battle of the Persian Gate, where the Persian satrap Ariobarzanes stood with a small but fiercely loyal force determined to avenge the humiliation of Gaugamela. The narrow pass twisted like a serpent, its cliffs rising to the sky, and as the Macedonians pushed forward, the Persians unleashed a devastating surprise attack from above, hurling boulders that crushed warriors instantly, firing arrows that rained down like a lethal storm, and launching spears that found the gaps between shields. The Macedonian phalanx struggled to hold formation in the cramped terrain, and for the first time since the conquest began, fear rippled through the ranks as men realized they were trapped in a stone corridor of death. Unable to advance or retreat, Alexander surveyed the carnage and understood that brute force would not win here, so he studied the shadows of the cliffs and the narrow crevices until he found a hidden mountain path revealed to him by local guides who feared Persian retaliation but feared Alexander even more. Under the cover of night, Alexander divided his forces, sending a detachment under Philotas to distract the defenders while he led an elite force through the secret path, climbing silently through darkness, gripping the rocks with bloodied hands as the mountain wind howled like the spirits of dead warriors. When dawn broke, Alexander appeared behind the Persian defenders, attacking them from the rear with the fury of a man who refused to be denied victory, and the Macedonian army charged from the front, trapping Ariobarzanes between two deadly tides of steel. The battle raged with desperate intensity, the Persians fighting with the bravery of men who chose death over surrender. But their courage could not withstand the combined assault, and the defenders of the Persian gate fell one by one until the resistance was crushed and the pass lay open. Alexander stood among the ruins of the Persian defense, breathing heavily, realizing that this victory had cost him more men than any battle except Gaugamela. Yet the path to Persepolis was now clear, and nothing stood between him and the heart of the Persian Empire. As the Macedonian army descended into the plains beyond the mountains, they saw Persepolis rising in the distance like a vision from another world, a city of gold pillars, palaces, and fire temples, glowing under the sun, the true symbol of Achaemenid power. Alexander paused only briefly, knowing that the world would judge him for what he would do next. For Persepolis was more than a city, it was the soul of Persia, the beating heart of everything Darius stood for. But Alexander was not driven by hatred. He was driven by the relentless logic of conquest, the knowledge that, if he spared the city, rebellion would rise from its ashes. When the Macedonians entered Persepolis, they took the royal treasury, the greatest collection of wealth in human history. And some say Alexander hesitated when he saw the grandeur of the palace, wondering if he had gone too far, but drunken rage and the demands of his men combined into a moment that shaped history. The burning of Persepolis. Flames devoured the wooden beams, smoke curled into the night sky, and the greatest symbol of Persian power fell to ashes, marking the true end of the empire. Yet Alexander was still not satisfied, for Darius had escaped yet again, fleeing deeper into the eastern provinces, chased like a shadow by the man who had defeated him at Gaugamela. Alexander ordered his army to continue the pursuit, unaware that the final confrontation between king and king would not happen on the battlefield, but in the lonely deserts where loyalty and betrayal collided. But even as he marched, conquering city after city, Alexander felt destiny pulling him forward, whispering that he was not yet done, that the world still had battles waiting for him, that he would not rest until every corner of the earth knew his name. And the legacy of Gaugamela and the Persian Gate would echo through his blood long after the empire of Darius turned to dust. The burning ruins of Persepolis still glowed in Alexander's memory as the Macedonian army marched deeper into the eastern lands, driven by the relentless pursuit of Darius III. For Alexander knew that as long as the King of Kings remained alive, the shadow of rebellion could rise again across the old Achaemenid world. And so the conqueror pressed forward with a determination that bordered on obsession, pushing his exhausted men across deserts that swallowed the horizon and through remote villages, whose people had never seen a Macedonian helmet. Rumors whispered that Darius had been betrayed by his own satraps, that the same nobles who once showered him with loyalty now plotted his downfall, hoping to curry favor with the unstoppable young conqueror who had shattered the Persian Empire at the Battle of Gaugamela and torn open its heart at the Battle of the Persian Gate. And Alexander, hearing these whispers, felt a complex mixture of vengeance and pity, for though he had crushed the Achaemenid Empire, he respected Darius as a king molded by fate. As the Macedonians rode through Bactria, the heat burned their lungs, the wind carried dust sharp enough to tear skin, and the mountains rose like jagged teeth that formed an unending maze. But Alexander refused to slow down, telling his men that destiny did not wait for the hesitant. Days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, until one afternoon, as the sun bled into the horizon, a small group of wounded Persian soldiers stumbled toward the Macedonian vanguard carrying news that would echo through history. Darius III had been captured by his own satrap Bessus, the governor of Bactria, who sought to depose him and declare himself the new king. The words hit Alexander like a spear to the chest, filling him with both fury and urgency, for he had wanted to defeat Darius himself, not see him fall at the hands of treachery. The furious march continued, and the Macedonian horses galloped until their hooves cracked the earth, pushing through narrow valleys where echoing winds carried the distant cries of forgotten tribes. At last, in a desolate stretch of desert, Alexander found what remained of Darius III, a broken chariot lying in the sand, the once glorious king dying from the wounds inflicted by Bessus's men, abandoned and fading alone beneath the brutal sky. As Alexander approached, Darius looked up weakly, recognizing the face of the man who had defeated him at Gaugamela, the man destiny had chosen to finish what he had begun. And with his final breaths, Darius spoke words of peace, asking Alexander to care for his family and preserve the honor of Persia. Alexander bowed his head, feeling the weight of history press onto his shoulders. And as Darius exhaled his last breath, the young Macedonian king declared that the Persian ruler had died a noble king, not a defeated enemy. The soldiers around him witnessed a moment that seemed carved from legend. Alexander draped his royal cloak over the fallen Persian monarch, a gesture of respect that transcended rivalry, conquest, and bloodshed, and afterward he ordered a royal funeral befitting the last Achaemenid king. But even with Darius dead, Alexander's path was far from complete, for Bessus had fled east, proclaiming himself the new king of kings, and Alexander could not allow such treachery to stand. The pursuit of Bessus led the Macedonian army deeper into the unforgiving lands of Sogdia, where the mountains twisted like stone giants and the valleys hid dangers beyond imagination. Villages resisted, fortresses clung to cliffs like eagle nests, and warriors of the region fought with the ferocity of men who had never bowed to any empire, Persian or otherwise. Alexander pushed forward, fighting small skirmishes every few days, each one adding another scar to his already battle-worn army. Yet the king remained as relentless as the sun, refusing to retreat or slow down, until at last he cornered Bessus, captured him, and sentenced him for betraying Darius, fulfilling the promise he had made over the dying king's body. With Darius avenged, Alexander turned his gaze even further east, toward lands no Greek had ever dared to dream of, lands filled with legends of monstrous warriors, great rivers, and kingdoms beyond the edge of the known world. His army continued through towering mountain fortresses, clashing with Sogdian rebels in brutal engagements like the assault on the Sogdian Rock, where Alexander scaled the impossible cliffs with volunteer climbers who risked death in exchange for glory, shocking the defenders into surrender. With each victory, Alexander's ambition grew. He no longer saw himself only as the conqueror of Persia, but as the master of the entire world. A man chosen by destiny to stand above all kings, all empires, all ages. Yet even as he marched deeper into unknown lands, he carried the memories of Gaugamela, where the impossible victory changed him forever, and the Persian Gate, where he faced the deadliest trap of his campaigns, and the lonely desert where he found Darius, the last rightful king of Persia, lying broken beneath a merciless sky. These moments forged him into a ruler unlike any before him, a man shaped by both triumph and tragedy. And so Alexander pressed eastward, driven by a hunger no empire could satisfy, leaving behind the ashes of Persepolis, the silence of fallen kings, and the eternal legacy of the battles that had defined his rise, knowing that the world would remember him not just as a conqueror but as the king who should have lost everything and instead won the earth itself.